Président, je vous remercie.
I thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. We have closely listened to the statements made by the distinguished members of this council, and I think I can at the outset make 3 comments in response. First and foremost, allow me to take note of the constructive comments made by the report on which appreciation was expressed by various delegations. And beyond this appreciations, we have received the encouragement extended to Cameroon to continue in its efforts to build up a state based on the rule of law, which is our country, and to further promote human rights. The second comment I would like to make is that distinguished delegations have made observations and recommendations. With respect to the recommendations, I believe that there's some overlap, in fact, between the recommendations and the observations. And the comments that were made indeed cover all aspects relating to human rights, whether this relates to civil and political rights, or economic, social, and cultural rights, and on this topic there were a great number of comments, the rights of specific groups. Now, if you allow me, Mr. President, I would like to provide some clarification and shed some light on a certain number of issues. At the outset, I would like to thank delegations which have addressed questions to us. My delegation views these questions as signs not only of the interest of various delegations, but also to the concern that they pay to the human rights situation in our country and the importance they attach to Cameroon. It is therefore with great pleasure and enthusiasm that I am prepared to provide the following clarifications. First of all, some delegation inquired about Cameroon's position on the ratification of the Rome Statute and the alignment of its national legislation to that instrument. I would like to take this opportunity to state that Cameroon is a signatory of the Rome Statute and that consultations are continuing within the country to consider the ratification of this instrument. We, moreover, have a productive cooperation. Thus, for example, the judicial officers of that institution can arrive in our country in the context of human rights inquiries. Requests for judicial assistance are executed by the judicial bodies of Cameroon in the framework of the cases on which the authorities have agreed to cooperate. I would also like to emphasize that following the legal reforms, serious crimes such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide may now be prosecuted before the national and military tribunals following the adoption of the law of the 2nd of July 2017, and these can be brought to the regular courts as well as to the military courts. I would like to shed some light on the measures taken by our government so as to ensure that our military forces comply with international human rights standards. This is a question that was put by a number of delegations, and in this context I can state that in order to eradicate the unlawful acts of some elements within the security forces or law enforcement forces, and in line with a person's right not to be subjected to torture or any inhuman, cruel, or degrading treatment, our strategy has been to carry out educational projects and activities to ensure that such officers are aware of their requirements. I should emphasize that the Army of Cameroon, as the army in other countries, is a professional army, which has always endeavored to accomplish its mission in strict compliance with its obligations and as defined by the government. However, as in any society, violations may occur. There may be some officers who go beyond what is authorized, and in this context, information and training sessions for law enforcement officials and security forces continue to be carried out by the government as well as our partners in this civil society. Any violations or abuses are reported, and those cases that are reported are subjected to inquiries and disciplinary and other sanctions. And this has been the case in the past. And as many have said, this testifies to Cameroon's commitment to protect human rights. With respect to court prosecutions and other sanctions, disciplinary sanctions, 100 law enforcement officers following inquiries were recognized as having committed acts of torture or other inhuman treatment, and the most stringent sanctions were imposed upon them. In particular, they were prevented from advancing in their careers, and there were other penalties handed down as well. In the same year, there were judicial convictions handed down, and 108 officials were brought to the courts for acts of torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment committed within the exercise of their functions. And they were convicted to a number of different sentences, the most severe of which was 5 years of imprisonment. So there is no impunity. The head of state is the commander-in-chief as well, and he himself has called for constant vigilance to ensure that no such excesses occur. Moreover, preventive detention is provided for such acts. There are cases which may be directly brought to the president of the court. In 2015, 57 inquiries were carried out and processed. There is also oversight over the places of detention, in particular within the police units and the gendarmerie units. These investigations are carried out by the state prosecutor and may be carried out by in response to any body signaling such possible cases. In the places of prevention of liberty, there are actions that are undertaken subsequent to review by the National Body for Human Rights and Liberties. The Compensation Commission for Victims has also looked into cases of abuse relating to Article 254 of the Criminal Procedural Code, which was adopted after February 2016. The first complaints have been submitted and they are now under review. There are some comments that were made several times in the statements of delegations, and that relates to the de facto moratorium on the execution of the death penalty in the context as well of the anti-terrorist legislation. In response to attacks by terrorist group, which led to the loss of many lives and material damage, Cameroon, as the international community knows very well, has been targeted by the Boko Haram sect. And in 2014, on the 23rd of December, Cameroon adopted a law to punish any act of terrorism. Some delegations earlier requested that we review the definition of terrorism. Now, there is no standard definition of terrorism. Most countries have adopted definitions that reflect that of the United Nations and other organizations, whether at the regional or sub-regional level. In response, therefore, to attacks by this group, Cameroon has provided for the death penalty for certain crimes, in particular the most serious crimes, those that threaten the lives of innocent civilians and undermine the national institutions. And this is provided for under the ICCPR Article 6, which states that the death penalty can only be handed down for the most serious crimes. So this has been established. We should emphasize that since the 1990s, Cameroon has been a de facto abolitionist state. So there have been no executions of any persons. We would clarify at this point that those who have made allegations stating that extrajudiciary executions were carried out, well, there have been no executions since the 1990s in Cameroon. That is when the government adopted the decision to suspend the death penalty. So this is one clarification I wish to bring in to reassure our partners and the international community that there are no extrajudicial executions carried out in Cameroon. All countries can be subjected at times and targeted by calumny and slander, but this is a fact that can be verified. Our country has carried out no execution of any kind, even against terrorists, since 1990. We're moving from French to English.
Sur les mesures relatives
with respect to measures to provide a fair trial for the members of the Anglophone community and separatists, and in compliance with the requirements of the freedom of expression and communication, I would like to say a few words about what we call the Anglophone problem. Now, I do not wish to shock anyone, but as you know, Cameroon is the daughter of the United Nations. We were a country which, after the Second World War, was placed under UN supervision. And this was carried out jointly by France and the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Following the history of our country, we shaped a single country. That is to say, we are not composed of a French state and an English state. Rather, Cameroon is the outcome of a merger of colonial states to achieve a single indivisible state. So there appears to be some impression that there is one English-speaking island and a French-speaking Bantustan. That is not the case. We are in one single country. Whether you find yourselves in the English-speaking area of the country or the French-speaking area of the country. In fact, the populations are merged and mixed, so we cannot consider certain parts of the country as being Anglophone or Francophone. This being said, Mr. President, I would like to bring to the kind attention of delegations the real situation, contrary to depictions that some might receive through the social media or from other sources. Cameroon, towards the end of 2016, received some corporate claims from two main parties, lawyers and teachers. And this occurred in the two regions of the southwest and the northwest, which are qualified as being the Anglophone regions. But Cameroon has regions which are on an equal footing and which are regarded as administrative regions and multilingual one. So the state received the claims of the trade unions and responded to them. The situation was brought back to normal, so there are no trade unions now or corporations which are making any claims in respect of any situation. However, the case is that some extremists have used these trade union claims politically so as to question the very structure of the state and to demand either secession or federalism. Now, given our constitution, we could not question the very structure of the state, and the President of the Republic requested that a dialogue be established so as to allow for the various claims to be considered and to allow the government to take the appropriate measures. And it is in this context that the Prime Minister and head of government was instructed by the President to conduct a dialogue with all parties concerned with the grassroots of the northwest and southwest regions, as we call them in our polity. So these negotiations, or rather this dialogue, continued, and it gave rise to some major decisions. One of these, which was adopted by this commission which is involved in the dialogue, is the institution of a commission for bilingualism, because we have French and English as official languages in our country, that is well known, and the protection and promotion of multiculturalism in Cameroon is important. That is to say, we recognize that Cameroon is a multi-ethnic state which has different ethnicities as well as different linguistic communities, such as those speaking English and French in it. So, Mr. President, these elements which wished to establish a separate state in breach of the constitution of Cameroon, which stipulates that it is a single unified country, engaged in acts of violence. They burnt down houses, they kidnapped people, they carried out rapes and destruction, and they called for hatred against the different communities and committed the most atrocious abuses. The images have circulated worldwide. I will not show them here. That is not the point of our meeting. But I would like you to understand that when we speak of the Anglophone problem, we need to understand these aspects. There is no problem as such. The problem that arises in Cameroon is that the government is now working towards some decentralization without questioning the very structure of the state or giving in to those who are committing acts of violence, killings, torture, and the burning of schools. These people are also preventing parents from sending their children to schools. They are intimidating people, and they are placing Cameroon in a position where we have the impression that the whole country is ablaze, but that is not the case. There is peace in this region. It is not the entire region or the entire country which has been involved in an uprising to say that they want a republic, or that the republic of our country is not properly functional. It is a community that has taken this entire region hostage, and which tries to raise the awareness of the international community, sometimes wrongly, to what they call repressions in the Anglophone region. In these regions, the state merely maintained what we call a protection of the law and order of the republic. That is to say, we protected the population against abuses. We ensured that all the powers of the state to grant the freedom of expression, the freedom of movement, were assured without any recourse to violence. But these particular elements, these individuals, start assassinating law enforcement officers. We have seen the latest images, which are quite atrocious, where law enforcement officers are pushed back like animals and ill-treated, and these images have circulated throughout the world. These elements have cut off heads, arms, feet, and these are the images we can see on the internet. These are atrocious images. No state can tolerate this state of affairs. Law and order must be maintained to ensure that our country can develop. So it is these law enforcement bodies that are deployed in the regions to uphold law and order. There is no emergency state. There are no extrajudicial executions, as is alleged. So now let's come back to the issue of the 47 individuals who were in Nigeria and who were extradited to Cameroon. They were not forcibly brought to Cameroon. Rather, our two countries, which have been neighbors for a long time, have an agreement, indeed have a number of agreements, and with Nigeria we have extradition agreements. And so these persons were brought back to Cameroon. They were not refugees. They were not refugees in Nigeria. Rather, these are people who, from a friendly country, carried out acts of terrorism and destabilization of the state of Cameroon. And therefore, the government of Cameroon requested their extradition. Currently, I can guarantee you that these people are properly held and followed up, and they will answer to the law in compliance with the rule of law, and they will have counsels to assist them when the trial starts. For the time being, this case is one that is being reviewed, and we can assure you that these people have not been arbitrarily arrested. If I may continue on this topic, I would just like to state that in the context of fighting against any subversion of the territorial integrity of the country by certain of these corporatist elements in the southwest and northwest, an international arrest warrant had indeed been issued against them due to acts of violence and assassinations which were carried out. On the 6th of January 2018, 47 of these people, that's the people I was talking about, were arrested and extradited to Cameroon at the request of Cameroon and in application of our cooperation agreement, which states that our two countries, Nigeria and Cameroon, assist each other. Their penalties that are provided for under Law 028 of the 23rd of December 2014 for terrorist acts. These suspects were brought to the law enforcement officers, and the legal proceedings will take their course. We have taken note of your comments and remarks on this topic, but I just wanted to say that with respect of the freedom of expression and communication, Cameroon is marked by openness in the media, and this situation has in fact fostered the multiplication of statements in the public arena in Cameroon. If I can just give you some examples. 1,300 publications are officially registered. We have 25 private television channels and 500 cable channels. We have a number of community radio and television stations that exist throughout the country. There are 107 private radio stations, as well as a number of foreign operators who are present in the audio-visual media in the country. So as to foster the freedom of expression and communication, 2 new laws were adopted. One is of the 20th of April 2015, which amends that of 2010, and which governs electronic communications, as well as the law governing audiovisual activities. Moreover, it is my pleasure to emphasize that there is a special fund for the development of the audiovisual which has been established. There is public support for private communication companies, and this has been pursued despite the budgetary constraints on the young state that we are, and the major contributions from the budgets that we already make in managing humanitarian crisis and so on. The numbers have been around 250 million, and in 2016 they were even higher. So as to ensure proper media usage, there have been efforts to reactivate the charter of the press identity cards, and this is the case in other countries as well. There are, for example, 1,000 press cards which were issued. With respect to the registration of licenses to the media, we must recognize that there are many promoters, and some have a provisional authorization which allows them to operate while they await official permanent accreditation. So this administrative tolerance allows us not to silence the press, as is sometimes alleged, but rather on the contrary, it allows operators to ensure that they have a return on investments for their activities. A simple declaration in the prefecture is sufficient to start up an activity. So this is just to say that the right to expression and communication is guaranteed.
On freedom of expression online in all regions, at some point, I must say, the internet was partially suspended or made unavailable in Cameroon. But now, so as to ensure the security of our people and their safety, we need to take all measures to ensure that there is online coverage throughout the country. And these efforts have been recognized by regional and international documents, Article 29, Paragraph 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and Article 27 of the African Charter of Human Rights, which includes irrenounceable safeguards for public order. It is by relying on these provisions that Cameroon moved towards, and I say this, moved towards the temporary suspension of the internet in the northwestern and southwestern region. In 2017, And this was due to the use of social networks by destabilizing forces in our country, which urged acts of hatred, of secession, and of violence against the state. So, in order to protect our population and to secure the stability of our country, we were forced to partially suspend internet service in that region. The conditions that led to the temporary suspension of internet across these two regions of the country were noted by the President of the Republic, and on April 20th, 2017, the Minister of Communication asked mobile telephone operators to re-establish the links in all regions, be it northwest, southwest, or in the south of our country. And ever since, internet is accessible by anyone, anywhere in the country. Freedom of expression is thus guaranteed in our country. And turning now to Cameroon's desire to ratify the Convention on Human Rights that were mentioned, I would like to reiterate that Cameroon is a party to 6 to 9 of the main conventions on human rights. And here I would like to say again that, as I said during my introductory remarks, Cameroon has not only ratified several conventions mentioned in the recommendations of previous cycles, but we have even gone further than the recommendations, such as the Convention of 184 of the ILO. This was mentioned by several delegations. It was on decent work, and we have rejected child labor, and the African Union Convention on the promotion of the rights of internally displaced people and assistance to them. We have also strengthened our provisions nationally to align them with the conventions we have ratified. And turning now to the violence against women, which includes female genital mutilation and early marriage, I would like to go ahead and specify that Cameroon has reasserted equality between man and women in its constitution, and we have even adopted a legislative framework that seeks to promote that equality. Now, perhaps I should say that our president sets great store by this idea, and he has expressed his view in this area. When it comes to violence against women specifically, a national gender bill was adopted in 2014 so as to promote gender equality. And in 2016, this was followed by a multi-sectoral action plan to implement it, so as to instruct our staff on gender equality. The United Nations campaign, He for She, was launched nationwide in 2016. This campaign has already had over 2,000 people sign up to it. Additionally, in the legislative framework, and this is concerning violence against women, we have improved our provisions by adopting a law of July 2nd, 2016, where we criminalize several actions against women, if not all violent actions. This includes physical violence, female genital mutilation, sexual harassment, which includes sexual violence, including rape, and also the marriage between the perpetrator of a rape and the victim is no longer exempted from criminal prosecution. When it comes to FGM, I can say that the practice is, as of now, punished by a 10 to 20-year sentence. And as to our fight against early and forced marriage, our legislation has harmonized the age of marriage in Cameroon, which is set to boys and girls at 19 years of age. Also, the 2016 Criminal Code severely punishes anyone who proceeds over the marriage of a child under the age of 18. And this was a change to the previous discriminatory legislation which allowed for the marriage of a 15-year-old girl. Distinguished delegates, I would like to point out that the plan to implement Resolution 1325 of the United Nations Security Council and related resolutions was adopted in 2017 so as to take into account the impact that the diverse humanitarian crises have had on women, and we are currently working on its implementation.
The fight against violence on children, it is necessary to mention that the government and its partners have been working to protect children against violence. Hence, institutions have been created which provide services for children victims of violence. Awareness-raising activities are also carried out. Support is provided for victims, and alleged perpetrators of violence on children are prosecuted. For instance, in Judgment Number 24/DLA of July 14, 2016, the accused who forcibly took his victim, a 10-year-old girl, into a bush and abused her sexually, was convicted and sentenced for indecency to child under 16. In judgment, crime, the accused was convicted for 6 years imprisonment for assault occasioning death of a minor. It is also worth mentioning that the government adopted in 2017 the National Policy Document on Children, which defined the strategic framework of the protection of children in Cameroon, aimed at protecting and preventing, sensitizing and addressing violence against them. Furthermore, it should be noted that Law Number 98/004 of 14 April 1998 on the orientation of education in Cameroon outlaw bodily abuse and all other forms of violence on children in school. S'agissant du mécanisme,
as for the mechanism, the national process that is in charge for the implementation of the recommendations that we have accepted in the past, it is my pleasure to tell you that an interministerial follow-up committee on the implementation of the recommendations and the decisions from international and regional human rights mechanisms has been implemented within the Office of the Prime Minister, and this was in 2013. And it receives all recommendations presented to Cameroon, which we then forward to various ministerial departments to ensure their implementation. Then evaluation sessions are held. During these assessment sessions, we note the progress made, we discuss challenges, and we try to adopt corrective measures. Mr. Vice President, I have covered most of the questions, I believe, but one that has not been answered yet regards birth registries. I can say that we are making efforts in this area and that the fight against child labor has been waged strongly, and it continues to be on our crosshairs. On health, something that was mentioned by some delegations, as we said previously in the presentation, all projects, all programs, and all our policies in the government to ensure that children are in proper health as well as their mothers, and especially all the efforts that we make to ensure the health of those that are born in least favorable conditions. We provide free vaccination, and we fight against certain pandemic diseases such as malaria, which is rampant in our region. And we are also making an effort to ensure that all contraception issues and abortion-related issues are limited. And to address a few questions on labor, employment, and work, Cameroon has always fully participated in the decision process that led to an agreement in the International Labour Organization. I need not elaborate on this any further, given that we have covered it enough, I believe. So that said, I will end my remarks here and ask you kindly to take note of the fact that we will continue to improve, as many of you have encouraged us, as many of you have warmly wished for us, to ensure that human rights are protected and promoted. Thank you, Vice President.
I thank His Excellency for the presentation and participation in this review. The report of the review will be prepared by the members of the Troika, namely the representatives of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Iraq and South Africa. In accordance with the procedure implemented since 2015, the recommendations section will be distributed in the afternoon of Friday, 18th of May, for adoption on the same day at 5 p.m. The full report, including the summary section, will be circulated by email on Monday, 28th of May, 2018. This brings us to the end of our meeting. We will reconvene this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. for the review of Cuba. Speaking time will be 50 seconds for all. You are kindly invited to ensure that your statements are deliverable within this time limit. Suspension, excuse me please, Your Excellency.
Chair, for giving me the floor. With your understanding, I just put ahead the explanation on various questions which were raised by the honorable delegates. And if you allow me, I will just take 1 or 2 minutes to make my closing remarks before you end up the meeting. Because
Your Excellency, you have 3 minutes that you can use as you wish.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. President, honorable members of the working group on the UPR, Cameroon appreciates the interest of you have shown for its periodic review and for the question and concern you have raised. We hope that the answer provided by my delegation have been thrown light to your concern, or at least have given you a better picture on the situation of human rights in my country. Your questions have been favorably received by my delegation. They are guideline and benchmark on the way to improving the human rights situation in Cameroon. Regarding your recommendation, be assured that Cameroon will carefully consider each of them. My country is committed to broad consultation involving all stakeholders before making a decision on each recommendation. We will therefore forward to the Council before the 39th session in September 2018 our position on the recommendation you have made today. Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi pour...
Mr. Vice President, allow me to conclude to thank you, sir, for the way in which you have guided our work. And I would like to thank further the members of the Troika, whose work we appreciate. I would be remiss were I to conclude without expressing my gratitude to the delegates that have taken the time and effort to look at the documents submitted and to draft the recommendations for this Universal Periodic Review. I am fully aware of your workload, and once again, I would like to thank you for your efforts. Cameroon would like to rely on you for our implementation of the recommendations we shall accept. Throughout this dialogue, we have not hit any of our limitations in security or in any other area, so as to create an inclusive society by taking into account the efforts of various national and international partners. Support of my country in this approach, wished by our partners to have territorial integrity and security through our country. And I would like at last to point out that in the UN system, international and peace treaties, human rights and development are inextricably intertwined. You cannot have one without the other. We are fully aware of the importance of developing human rights in our country and the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, which will be done by leaning on our bilateral and multilateral partners.
As far as my country is concerned, we will spare no effort to comply with the commitments that will be made under this UPR. I thank you for your kind attention.
Once again, I thank His Excellency and the delegation for the presentation and participation in this review. For afternoon session, inscribed speakers who wish to withdraw from the list are kindly invited to inform the Secretariat at the latest 30 minutes before the start of the review. Finally, all participants are invited to be in the room on time. The meeting is closed. I thank you very much.